here's Brody Brazil.
Let's talk about what's next for the San Jose Sharks as they hopefully soon will get to a 2021 campaign early in the next calendar year. Now, these are 5 things, really 5 themes that I'm looking at. They are definitely not the answers. They're only the questions. They're only the things that I'll be watching most closely as we hopefully get closer to an NHL season. I'll begin with number 1, and for San Jose, this is priority number 1. How do you fix team defense? It honestly was their staple from 2018 into 2019, but then something just happened. They totally got away from it 2019 into 2020. And the stats prove it. I mean, they were one of the worst teams in the league 5-on-5 defensively, but what's crazy about that is they were also one of the best 4-on-5, shorthanded. Like, does that make any sense? Not at all. But I do know the one takeaway from that, for me personally, is that they're capable of making strides. They're capable of playing a very structured and sound game of defensive hockey. But they just didn't do it last year for whatever reason. Now, I say they didn't do it. Things did look a little bit better, and the results were a little bit more improved with Bob Boughner as the head coach. It's not to knock what Pete DeBoer was doing. Sometimes you just need a different voice, a different emphasis, but it was also very hard to judge the Sharks after Boughner took over versus the team that started the season out because there were so many injuries, there were traded players, really apples and oranges. So I'm very interested to find out for the Sharks if this is just a strategy thing that they need a little bit more of. I don't think it's a personnel thing. I know these players as individuals are capable of playing a high level of defensive hockey. I also want to point out too, when I say team defense, a lot of minds, for whatever reason, go right to the blue line. They go right to the defenseman. And I do want to point out, I realize this is a very talented group on the back end. I mean, look at the names: Burns, Carlson, Marc-Edouard Vlasic, Mario Ferraro was a great addition last year, but it's not about the defensemen. In fact, it may actually be even more about the forwards and their defensive responsibilities and that aspect of the Sharks improving. I mean, what am I talking about here? You fully know, if you watch the games from last season, allowing way too many odd man chances, way too many net front chances, too many turnovers that led to great opposition chances, breakdowns right in front of the Sharks' own blue paint. And a lot of this, as I'll discuss in just a second, a lot of this made the goalies look bad. These were team mistakes that ultimately fell on the netminders because they were the last line of defense, but it's a lot like basketball. I mean, there is such a difference between a 15-foot jump shot and giving up a slam dunk. Like, the shot percentage is so much greater as proximity decreases. And the opportunity, the nature of the opportunity is much better. Of course, the opposition's going to do better with it. So that's an issue for San Jose, cleaning things up defensively. They've got to be better without the puck. And I think as you look at the NHL, it's a thing where scoring comes and goes, right? Your offense throughout a season for certain players and really the whole group, it might go in a rut, or it might go off for a while. It might go unconscious for a while in a very good way. But if you're a really good team defensively, it just seems like defense doesn't slump and good defense shouldn't slump. So the Sharks need to get back to that as much as anything else in terms of making improvements and making strides. All right, number 2 on the topic of team defense, but really it's the goalie situation. It's a little bit different now with Aaron Dell's departure to Toronto. He's going to try and find a new role with the Maple Leafs, but it's now Martin Jones and Devan Dubnyk in some kind of tandem. Before we get to that, let's reverse to last season. Jones and Dell. Can anybody sit here and say they were good last year? I think those two individuals would tell you themselves that they wanted to be better. So I don't know that you can necessarily say they were good or great. I think that's fair, and that's fine. But the real question has to come right after this, and it's maybe the more important part. Were the goalies always set up for success? Were they set up most of the time for success. On a lot of nights, absolutely not is the easy and obvious answer. And yeah, we flash up their stats on the screen, save percentage, goals against, and people look down on the struggles and they say, there it is right there. That's what's hurting the team. But in reality, those are individual stats. But those are really team-based. They come with the effort of the skaters in front of the goalies. Now, it's not to say that a goalie can't make some great stops every night, and you do need that at this level of play and competition. You do need a couple great saves per night. Can you ask your goalie for 6 saves, 6 great ones a night? Yeah. Stand on your head 6 times? Okay. Can you ask your goalie to do that a dozen times a night? Every other night? In this league, it's not realistic. You can't put them in unreasonable situations over and over and over, like I'm talking about with the odd man rushes and the net front chances. That kind of stuff is what hangs your goalie out to dry. But going back to this year and the tandem with Jones and Devan Dubnyk, I think it's interesting. In fact, it's compelling. You have both guys coming off rough last seasons, and we really know the track record and the backstory with Jones. Great start to his career in San Jose. In more recent years, has struggled to find consistency, but Devan Dubnyk is also an interesting study. Had a couple successful years with the Oilers. Then within a span of 364 days, less than a year, he went from Edmonton to Nashville to Montreal to the AHL for a little while, back with the Arizona Coyotes, and then ultimately signed with the Minnesota Wild, actually got traded there and found his footing, found success, and sustained it all over again. He became an all-star. He was a Vezina candidate, won the Masterton Trophy that very first year. So a lot of upside for Devan Dubnyk, and he feels comfortable in San Jose. He wants to get back to that. Martin Jones wants to get back to a level that we've seen him with the Sharks. So there's chips on shoulders. I always love when that's the case. These guys want to work hard. And I also think it's a great thing to have Yevgeny Nabokov as the, now brand new full-time goalie coach with the Sharks. It's a voice that I know a lot of players, a lot of goalies are going to respect. And so I think there's a lot of upside here with the goalie situation. Again, we know that team defense is the root of this, I think. We know goalies are a part of this. I like at least what the situation is with the goalies right now and the resources they have. All right, let's talk about number 3 here, players as people and chemistry and buy-in. Now, this is something that the stats didn't really show us during last season, but it definitely became more evident as the year came to that unfortunate halt and conclusion. Just listening to players and talking to guys and understanding body language, and you could kind of understand that this group unraveled a little bit last year, on and maybe a little bit off the ice. And it wasn't like something bad happened or controversial happened. It's just that losing takes its toll on a group. And maybe you could see it. Maybe you could see it in the win-loss record, or maybe the one-sided goal differential of games. You get blown out a couple times, or you lose a couple heartbreakers that just fell apart at the end. And it kind of makes you look and realize that there are some things going on here with this group. But I think what you also saw last year in the unraveling process was individuals trying to fix team problems on an individual level. Everybody trying to do what they thought was best individually to help right the ship. And in reality, that may have just compounded the problem. Again, it's not a bad thing. People care. They just went a bunch of different directions in trying to get this done, as opposed to coming together and making it happen that way. Now, I'm not saying that is guaranteed to continue at all. It's just last year, it's the way it went. It's the way it unraveled, and it did not work. But I also know some things are different this year. I'm not saying better. I'm not saying worse. I'm just saying that without Joe Thornton around, that was a huge personality. He was a huge player on the ice. It's a Hall of Famer on the ice. It was a huge personality inside the dressing room. Again, it's going to be different without the big fella, without his voice, without all the little things he would do that nobody would ever see. It's going to be different. And I also think Logan Couture, on a separate point here, wants to make this different for himself and for the team. His first go-around last year as captain, I mean, it was rocky. And it's not to even think about pointing a finger in that direction. What I'm saying is that he wants to put this on his shoulders. He wants to help make this right, do all the right things to make this how it could and should be. I think Logan takes some of how last year went personally. So all that, and then you add in Bob Bugner now as the head coach, officially, no more interim title. I think all that adds in to make you understand that whether you wanted this or not, there's kind of a relative new chapter thing, a new chapter in San Jose. And this group right now is getting a ton of time off. It's going to be a while since their last game to their next competitive game. So hopefully time off, rest, recovery, thinking about things, digesting them, and coming back together. Hopefully all that stuff I just talked about added in makes for a whole better group situation in 2021. Point number 4 here is last year's young core of players that the team came out of training camp with and was hoping that they would come through. That just did not happen. That young core was not really ready last year. It didn't take a lot of time to realize that. In fact, just a couple games in, the Sharks went out and got Patrick Marleau for reasons of depth. They just understood that they didn't have all the help up front that they were going to need. And then later on in the season, Stefan Nason came along and Joel Shellman came along. And a lot of times we looked back and said, what would the Sharks have done if they didn't bring these guys in? And I'm not going to bury anybody here individually. I'm talking in the sense of the group and the young players, but I think it's already been said that the depth just was not there. And by the way, individually, I think those young players, they can still be great. I have no doubts. It just wasn't their time. And speaking of time, maybe in another era of the NHL, like the Sharks could have gotten away with being strong up front with, their top 6 forwards being, deeper and the third and fourth line, can kind of do its job and not worry about it. And maybe even the top 4D would carry a lot of the weight and you'd figure out, how to work the rest. But that's just not the way it matches up in this day's NHL. You have to be deep in all areas, in all facets, especially the way your lineup shakes out. So it's just not that style and league anymore that you can get away with not being a deep team. It'll show, essentially, is my point here. And I think as part of that, there's no question that the Sharks pipeline has been tested, and it's going to continue that way. It's going to, in fact, even get more interesting because there's maybe not going to be an AHL season to go along with the NHL season. So how are you going to keep your youngest players developing and evaluate them? It's just going to be very difficult to know how much depth and when young players are ready. So for San Jose, adding a Ryan Donato up front, adding the veteran presence of a Matt Nieto and a Patrick Marleau again, those are all good things for the standpoint of known commodities. That's what you're going after right now. You need players who you pretty much know what you're going to get out of them instead of hoping that you can give these other young players opportunity and it pans out. Now, that is important. Don't get me wrong. You need to leave room for your youngest players. Look at Mario Ferraro last year. If you don't leave him room, he doesn't show you that he can play on an every night basis like he did. So you need to have that opportunity. It's just that you also need to measure that with depth that you have. And you got to be flexible, right? Because the Sharks thought they had the depth. And by all indications, they wouldn't have gone with it unless they thought they had it last year. It just didn't play out. All right, point number 5 here is realistic expectations for this team. Are they a playoff team at the beginning of a next season? Do you know that for sure? Do you know that they're not for sure? I honestly cannot assume anything right now about this group. I think you also have to consider that it's bound to be a crazy season, a lesser amount of games that can't play 82. It's also going to happen in a really short time span. It's going to be a sprint, not going to be a marathon, definitely going to be a sprint. And the one thing I know about these sprints, you cannot have a slow start out of the gate. You cannot do what they did last year, struggle in October, kind of maybe find your way in November, but then totally lose it in December. You have to be consistent, solid, and steady out of the gate. Let's be honest. By mid-December last year, with the coaching change, we knew the Sharks were done for. It was at that point where they would have had to have been perfect after the coaching change, and that was asking plenty much, too much, actually. So this team, look, they have great pieces. It's not a knock against that. When I say I'm not sure about playoffs, I'm not sure about expectations, it's not because of that. It's only because I don't know how those pieces are going to fit together in this team puzzle. Can they be a great team? Absolutely. They have all the right ingredients. How does this cooking session go? How does it all come together for the entree? And you also factor in that the Western Conference is as competitive, it's as heavy as ever. So that part of it's not going to be easy. And like I've been detailing here, there's 5 things I'm pointing out right now. The Sharks have plenty of areas to remedy. So that does it. My 5 things to look forward at in terms of a 2021 season. But I guess if there was a point number 6, at this juncture, I just hope there is a 2021 season that gets started sooner than later.